Good morning. It's 11 a.m. here in New York City, and this is our second Hans Christian Andersen storytelling at the statue. And today we have two fantastic storytellers, Julie Della Torre and Judith Heinemann, who you see through the incredible magic of my co-host and amazing tech person, Simon Brooks, who's also a fantastic storyteller, who is pretending to be live at the statue for your pleasure.
But I'm not. I'm in the garage.
When Andersen wrote these stories in the 1800s, he said that he was writing with the language of folktale and fairy tale, which in a literary sense at that time was really radical. And now here we are in 2020, and we are going back into the page. And our brilliant storytellers are making these stories oral again. The two stories you can hear today, Andersen wrote when he was quite young: The Emperor's New Clothes and The Wild Swans. And something to know about Andersen and these stories of why they have lasted so long is that he wrote them for pleasure of the ear and the heart, but they also were, like all great stories, social commentary to resist some of the rigid and difficult conditions in the world at the time he wrote. So it's a pleasure to introduce Julie. I have heard her tell stories at the statue for too many years to mention. And she wrote, "I'm a storytelling educator in New Jersey, bringing folk and fairy tales to children and adults throughout the state." And at this moment, she's being heard throughout the world. She founded the New Jersey Storytelling Festival over 25 years ago. And she said that she learned almost everything that she knows about storytelling by sitting and listening at the statue for years and years and years. And it's true. So it's with a great heartfelt pleasure to introduce to you Julie and a story we all need to hear: The Emperor's New Clothes.
Thank you so much on this beautiful day for storytelling. There once was an emperor who loved nothing better than beautiful new clothes. Why, he didn't care about soldiers. He didn't care about the theater. He didn't even care about going for a ride in the park unless it was to show off his beautiful new clothes. He would have had a new suit of clothes every hour of the day if his treasury could have afforded it. Whereas we might say the king is in his council chambers, they would say our emperor is in his dressing room. Now, life in the city where the emperor made his palace, oh, it was happy and gay. Oh, many strangers came every day to see the sights. One day, two swindlers came to town, two rogues, two tricksters. They said that they were weavers and that they could weave the most beautiful cloth in the world. Magnificent it was, the colors and the patterns. But not only that, it had a marvelous special quality. And that quality? Why, if anyone was stupid or anyone was not fit for their job, they would not be able to see the cloth. "Whoa," said the emperor. "Oh, I must have some of that cloth. Why, if I had some of that cloth, I would be able to tell which of my subjects was stupid. I would be able to tell which of my counselors were unfit for their job. Yes, I must have some of that cloth." And so he gave the two swindlers great sums of silver and gold coins and set them up in a room that had a loom in the corner. Now, all those silver and gold coins, went right into the knapsack of those swindlers, and they sat down at the loom. They ordered silver and gold threads. These also went into their knapsacks. They pretended to weave at the loom. Now, they sat there and they worked, but the loom remained empty. Everyone in town had heard about this cloth with its special quality. Oh, they couldn't wait to see the cloth. In truth, they wanted to see which of their neighbors was stupid, which one's unfit for their jobs. So they waited. Now, after a time, the emperor thought he'd like to see how things were getting on with the weavers. But when he thought of that special quality, his heart began to beat strangely. Not that he thought he wouldn't be able to see the cloth, of course, but still, it might be better to send someone else first. I know. I'll send my wise old prime minister. Why, he's so wise, he'll be able to judge the cloth, and he's fit for his job if anyone could be. And so the wise, good old man went into the room where the weavers were working. And he looked to the loom. He saw nothing, but he didn't say that out loud. Come closer, said the swindlers. Come and look, that you might better see the colors and the patterns. The good old prime minister, he went over and he looked at the empty loom, but as there was nothing to see, he saw nothing. He opened his eyes wide, he adjusted his glasses, and he stared. Well, what do you think? Said the swindlers. Oh, said the prime minister. To himself, he thought, I can't see anything. Am I stupid? Am I unfit for my job? Oh, that is too horrible. No one must know that. And so he stared at the loom and he said, yes, it's beautiful, beautiful. Oh, they said, you can see these shades of colors, and they began to describe the colors that they had thought they would use. And then the patterns they described, and the prime minister kept his ears wide open so that he could hear the words the swindler spoke and repeat them to the emperor. Yes, he said, I shall tell the emperor that it pleases me very much. Oh, that is a compliment, said the swindlers. And the prime minister went back and told the emperor everything that he had heard. Well, after some time, the emperor thought that he would send his trusted counselor to see how the swindlers were getting on. The trusted counselor walked into the room and, oh dear, I can't see a thing. I know I'm not stupid, he said. I must be unfit for my job. Oh, that is even worse, he said. But he didn't say it out loud. Instead, he stared and he looked. Well, come closer, said the swindlers. And so he did. And they described the colors and they described the patterns. And he listened very well. And he went back to the emperor and told the emperor, it is the most charming piece of material I have ever seen. The swindlers were giving much more gold and silver threads. These also went right into the swindler's knapsack. And the loom remained as empty as it had been before. Now, the time finally came when the emperor knew he would have to go and see how the cloth was getting along. He wanted to see it before it was taken from the loom. And so one day he went with his prime minister, his trusted counselor, all the people of the court, and they entered the room. Everyone could see that the weavers were very busy at the loom. But the emperor stared. I can't see anything, he said. Am I stupid? Am I unfit to be emperor? Oh, this is too much. He walked closer and he stared at the empty loom. But as there was nothing to see, he saw nothing. And though his eyes saw nothing, he nodded his head and he said, "It's lovely, lovely." "Is it not magnifique?" said the prime minister. "Oh, aren't the colors and the patterns perfect?" said the trusted counselor. They both thought everyone in the room could see the cloth. Well, all the people of the court, when the emperor said how lovely it was, they all cheered and clapped. "Oh, your highness, the colors are so beautiful, how they meld together, and the patterns, oh, they're so intricate. Oh, your highness, you should have a suit of clothes made from this material for the next great procession." Everyone agreed, cheered, and clapped. The two weavers were made royal knights of the loom, and they were given the task to make a suit of clothes for the emperor. The night before the great procession, everyone could see how busy the swindlers were. They stayed up all night. 16 candles lit the room. Everyone could see as they took the cloth from the loom, how they cut the air with great scissors, how they sewed with needles that held no thread at all. And at last, it was announced, the emperor's new clothes are ready. On that day, the emperor, with all the court, went into the room. "Welcome, your highness," said the swindlers, holding up the clothes that they should have made. "Oh, aren't they glorious? Your highness, it is so well made. This cloth is so light. It'll feel like you're wearing nothing at all, but that is their special quality. Come, let us help you into your clothes. If you would be so gracious as to step before the mirror and take off your clothes, we'll help you into your new ones." And so the emperor was obedient, and he went before the mirror. He took off his clothes, and the swindlers pretended to help him into his new ones. "Your trousers, your highness, be careful stepping into them. And your robes, your highness," they said. And last of all, the train, and they tied it around his waist. There were two gentlemen of the royal bedchamber who were to hold up the end of the train, and they fiddled around on the floor trying to find what wasn't there. And at last, the two of them held up their hands empty, pretending to hold the train that wasn't there. The master of ceremonies came in. "Your highness, the crimson canopy under which you will walk is ready." The emperor took one last look at how his clothes fit. Everyone cheered. "Oh, your highness, they fit so well. The colors suit you." And yes, he said, "Yes, I'm ready." And out he went to walk under the crimson canopy. As they were walking along the street, the crowds were lining the street, cheering and clapping. People were hanging out of the windows. All of them. They couldn't wait to see the emperor's new clothes. In truth, they couldn't wait to see how stupid their neighbors were or how unfit for their jobs. Oh, as he walked along, everyone cheered. "Your highness, your clothes are beautiful. Oh, the colors are so perfect on you. And the fit, it's never been better. Oh, the patterns," everyone cheered. Never before had the emperor's new clothes been such a success. As he walked along, all of a sudden, a little child up ahead called out, "But he doesn't have anything on." "Oh," said the father, "listen to the child." He said, the emperor has nothing on. And soon it was spread, "The emperor has nothing on. The emperor has nothing on. The emperor, The emperor has nothing on. Oh, the emperor knew that what they said was true. Still, he said, I am the emperor. I must proceed until the end. And so he held his head higher, and with great pride, he walked on toward the end of the procession, followed by those two gentlemen from the royal bedchamber, holding their hands in the air, holding the train that wasn't there at all.
So, thank you, Julie. So great to hear this story at this moment. Of course, you think, did Andersen foresee 2020? Or have we always had foolish leaders who can't tell the truth from non truth? Absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a delight to tell on days today. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. That was wonderful.
Thank you, Simon.
So next up, we have Judith Heinemann. Hold on one second as I goober around with this system. Hi, Judith. How are you doing today? Oh, I've got to unmute you as well. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you. It's wonderful to be here with you virtually at the statue.
It's good to have you here.
Thank
So
you.
Judith has received an Arts Westchester Artist Grant, which has enabled her to produce a one-woman show called Feats of Courage about three amazing women who survived World War II. She also has a couple of CDs out, Grimm's Grimmest, which is a fun CD if you like the dark stories, because she's got all the dark stories on there. And also, where is it? The Renaissance, and then there's the Magic Carpet, Songs and Stories from Mesopotamia and Ancient Egypt, which have won Parents' Choice Awards. Today, however, Judith is going to tell us her version of The Wild Swans, which was originally written, as Laura said at the beginning, in Andersen's younger years in 1848. Take it away, Judith.
Thank you. This is a very special story. It resonates with me personally, and I will tell you more about it when it's done. Once, in a faraway land, there lived a king with 11 sons and one daughter, Elisa. Oh, the children had a wonderful childhood, even though their mother had died when they were very young. There was nothing that they lacked. When they had tea parties, they had real sweets and baked apples. Oh, and when they went to school, they wrote on golden slates with diamond pencils. But this happiness would not last. For the king married again, a wicked sorceress. And she cared nothing for the children. She turned the king against them rather quickly. And when they wanted to have their tea parties instead of food, she said, "My dear, just fill your teacup with sand and use your imaginations." Within a week, she had sent Elisa off to live in the forest with peasants. And a week later, when she saw those handsome 11 princes, she cursed them and said, You will fly away as ugly birds, silent with no voices. You will fly forever and fend for yourselves. Go! But because they were so good, her magic wasn't that powerful. And instead of ugly birds, they turned into magnificent, white, wild swans with a weird cry. And off they went. They tried to circle low at the farmhouse where their sister was sleeping and flapped their wings to awaken her, but no one heard them. And so they had to fly off to the land across the sea. When Elisa was 15 years old, She was summoned back to the kingdom, for her father wanted to see her. Oh, the queen would have turned her into a wild swan, but she dare not disobey her king. So when Elisa returned, the queen saw the most gorgeous young woman, and so her heart was filled with evil and plotting. But she said, "Oh, my dear, you've lived in the forest so long. I would like to draw a bath for you in my marble bathroom with the plush pillows and carpets." But in preparation, this wicked woman took 3 poisonous toads. She picked them up and kissed them with her poisonous lips and said to the first toad, "When Elisa goes into the bath, you are to jump upon her head to make her lazy and stupid the way you are. Go, splash." And the second toad she kissed, "And you," she said, "you shall jump upon Elisa's forehead to make her ugly and full of warts like you." Splash. And the third toad she lifted up and kissed. "And you," she said, "shall jump upon her heart to make her evil and wicked as you." Go, splash. And the water turned a greenish tinge. "Oh, come, my dear, your bath is drawn," she said, and helped Elisa take off her clothes. And when Elisa slipped into the water, indeed, the first toad jumped upon her head, the second on her forehead, the third upon her breast, but she didn't notice them at all. And when she emerged from the bath, what was left in the tub were 3 red poppy flowers. Oh, the queen was even more incensed. Oh, my dear," she said, "I must put some oil and salve upon you." And she took the brown liquid of a walnut and smeared her arms and face, and took this foul-smelling salve and matted her hair and put it upon her face and said, "Go now, your father awaits. Go see your father." And when this filthy creature came before her father, oh, the king recoiled. "Oh, who is this creature? Oh, what a foul smell! Take her out of my sight immediately." Elisa crept out of the kingdom before the wicked woman did anything else to her. And she wandered and wandered and wandered into the wood, not knowing where she was going, but wishing that she could find her brothers. As soon as she entered the forest, night fell, and she found a mound of moss and lay down her head, feeling frightened and alone. But at that moment, thousands of glowworms, of fireflies, surrounded her and embraced her, and she slept. And the next morning, she awakened and wandered and meandered a well, and met an old woman coming toward her, who was holding a basket of berries. "Oh, my dear girl, would you like some berries?" Oh, Elisa was so hungry that she said, "Yes, thank you," and had her midday meal, and said to the old woman, "By the way, have you seen 11 princes? I'm looking for my brothers." "No," said the old woman, "but I did see 11 beautiful white swans down by the edge where the sea begins, and on their heads there were little golden crowns. Oh, come, I'll show you." And she took Elisa to a ledge and said, you see down there is a river. If you follow the river, you will come to the end of the sea and may very well find them there." So Elisa started. She heard the brook. She heard the water. She was so thirsty that when she got to a certain part of the stream, there was a clear pool. And as she bent down to cup her hands with, "Ooh, who is this ugly, filthy creature?" she thought. And she took some water and splashed her eyes. and her forehead and rubbed her cheeks and saw her own flesh again. Immediately she plunged into the cool pool, scrubbed herself clean and washed her hair, and when she emerged, she was as lovely as she was before and continued on her journey. And there she made her way down to the edge of the sea. But there were no boats. How can I get across to find my brother, she thought. And when she looked down, she noticed the waves relentlessly smoothing the strong stones. And it gave her courage. And she said, I will be as relentless as the waves in finding my brothers, no matter what it took. And there, in the seaweed, were 11 swans' feathers. She picked them up, and just as twilight fell, she heard the flutter and the flapping of wings and hid behind a bush. She was so frightened. And there, when darkness fell, and she peeked behind the bushes, were 11 handsome princes. Although it had been a few years, she recognized them, came shouting out of the bushes and embraced her dear brothers, and they recognized her as their dear sister, Elisa. They spent the night talking about the wicked deeds that the witch had done to them both, and the eldest brother explained the curse. "We are wild swans," he said. "We must fly all day long, never touching the ground until nightfall. For if we're caught among the clouds in human form, we will plunge to our deaths. But we come only once a year and stay for only 11 days. The journey is long from our homeland, and there is no island to light upon, just one stone, one rock in the middle of the sea. We fly on the 2 longest summer days of the year and stay for 11 days. And tomorrow we must return. How can we leave you, our dear sister, after we've just found you?" they said. And one brother said, "When I am in human form, my arms are strong enough to carry you through the forest." But they all looked at each other. And the swans said, "If we put ourselves together, surely there's a way to carry Elisa with us across the sea." And that night they spent weaving a net of reeds and supple willow branches. When it was done, Elisa lay upon it and fell asleep. And as soon as the sun rose, each wild white swan put a piece of the net in their beak. And then they lifted her up into the air and started to fly back to their home. Elisa awakened. What a wonderful sensation this was, floating in the air. She felt as though she was dreaming. But she also knew that her weight was dragging them down and making their flight slower. Would they ever find that stone to rest upon in the middle of the ocean when night fell? And they flew and they flew, and the edge of the sun was just sitting on the edge of the water, about to set. And they looked down. The winds were whipping up. There was to be a storm, and they couldn't see the stone. And all of a sudden, down they all dove. And Elisa thought that surely they were plunging to their deaths, but the birds hovered and looked and saw the stone. And then they floated down just in time for the sun to sink totally behind the horizon. They achieved their human form just as the storm came and held each other very tightly, and the thunder roared. But they lasted the night even with the waves whipping their bodies. And when the sun arose, they lifted Elisa up and flew to their own kingdom. And there, when they alit at sunset, was a cave. And they said, "This is where you shall stay. We have a chamber just for you. May you dream well." And she said, "Oh, if only I could dream how to break the spell and deliver you back as humans for all day and night." And that night, she dreamed. She saw a fairy coming to her in the dream, who strangely resembled that old woman she met in the forest with the berries. And she spoke to her and said, "Can you help me break the spell?" And the fairy said, "Are you strong enough for this task? Are you very brave? Are you willing to endure pain and suffering and fear?" "Oh, yes, yes," Elisa said. "I will endure any pain, any suffering, so that I could save my brothers." And so the fairy said, "Growing around your cave and in the churchyard, the graveyard, grow stinging nettles. You must pick them with your bare hands, and your fingers will burn, and your skin will be full of blisters, and you will feel that your arms are on fire, but you must pick them. And then with your bare feet, you must stamp on them until they are as smooth as flax, and weave a green thread. And when you have this thread, you are to knit 11 shirts. And when they are done, you shall throw them over your brothers' swan heads, and they shall attain human form once more. But you must not speak a word from the moment that you start knitting until the very last shirt is made. You must remain mute, for if you utter a single word, it will be like a knife plunging into their chests and they will die. Can you do this?" And then the fairy touched her hand with the stinging nettles that she was holding, and it burned, and Elisa awakened, and there beside her in the cave was that bundle of nettles. She immediately set out, plucking and pulling them with her bare hands as they burned and blistered, but she did not stop and started to knit and knit and knit and finished one shirt. And at nightfall, when the brothers returned in their human forms, she couldn't speak to them. And then, when they saw the blisters on her hands and what she was doing, they knew that she was in service to them. One brother's tears fell upon her hands, and for the moment, the blisters went away and they were less painful. And thus she knit, and the next morning, when she saw the brothers off, she sat outside the cave that was covered with vines and leaves and started to knit and knit and knit, for she had made a lot of flax and their threads and rope. But then she heard a hunting party, horns and hounds, and she heard the dogs, and she quickly gathered up all the nettles and the one shirt, sat upon them in the cave, and the dogs came and barked in front of the mouth of the cave. The king, a most handsome young man who was leading the hunt, wondered why the dogs were barking and went inside the cave. There he saw the most beautiful young woman. "What are you doing in this cave? You shouldn't be living in these circumstances. Let me take you to my palace, where you will live in luxury." She shook her head. No, she didn't want to go, but she couldn't say anything to explain herself. "Oh, no," the king said. "You will come with me. I only want your happiness. This is no place for you to live," and picked her up, put her on his horse, and took her to his palace. She cried, she wrung her hands, but she could say nothing. And when he brought her to the palace, she saw splendid rooms and delicious food, but there was no smile upon her face. Her eyes were downcast. But the king had an idea, and he said, "I've prepared a small room for you, and on the floor and the walls were costly green silken carpets, just like the little cave." And one of the hunters, out of curiosity, had gathered all of the flax and the thread and the one sweater and tossed it into this little chamber. The king said, "I thought this would amuse you, that you could go back to your old work." She felt such love for the king at that moment that she took his hand and pressed it to her lips. And though she couldn't say anything in words, her eyes spoke of the love she had for him. And he put her to his breast. And although she didn't care for finery, the maids came up and dressed her in velvet and silk. And when she came downstairs, it was as though she had bewitched them all. And the king said, "You shall be my bride." But the mean archbishop took the king's ear and said, "I think she is a witch, and she has put a spell on you and the kingdom." But although it went into his ear, it did not pierce his heart. And they were married. But every night, Elisa would steal from their bed and go into the small, green, cave-like chamber and knit and knit and knit, and her fingers would burn and blister, and she knit. But when she finished 6 shirts, she had run out of this nettle flax and knew the only place that it was growing was the churchyard. "How can I go undetected?" she said. But in the middle of the night, she stole out to the churchyard, and the archbishop was watching. He stayed awake to spy on people. But in the center of the churchyard were lamia, women whose lower bodies were snakes and upper torsos were female. And they sat upon the gravestone, eating the flesh of newly buried corpses. Elisa was afraid and lowered her eyes, for the nettles grew just where they were sitting. But they did not harm her. And she pulled and pulled and plucked those nettles and went back into the chamber and knit and knit and knit. But the archbishop told the king that his wife was a witch, and he had seen her go into the churchyard and cavort with these lamia, these forgotten creatures. The king didn't want to believe it, but he pretended to be asleep, and each night he watched as Elisa left their bed and followed her to the little chamber. She finished 10 shirts when she ran out of the nettle flax. "I must go out one more time," she said. And this time the archbishop summoned the king and said, "Watch, watch where she goes. She goes into the churchyard, and she cavorts with those deadly creatures, the lamia. She is indeed a witch." And she gathered the nettles and brought them back. But the king confronted her and said, "You are a witch, and let the people decide." And instead of her nice, warm, soft bedchamber, they threw her into a dungeon. And one of the guards threw in the flax and said, "Oh, these stinging nettles shall be your pillow, and all of these stinging shirts shall be your blanket. Now burn." This could not have been a more wonderful gift. She gathered the shirts, she had the flax, and she knit and she knit and she knit. The youngest swan brother lit outside the gates of the dungeon. She heard him. They had found her. The next morning, she was to be taken to the stake and burnt. And oh, how the crowds wanted to see this. And the swans could not plead in her defense, but she continued to knit and knit and knit. And then in the morning, when she was put on this old and rickety cart, led by a threadbare mare, to the funeral pyre, the crowds pushed forward and said, see how she mumbles. She's mumbling some curses, but she was really reciting silent prayers. And look at that witchcraft she has in her hand, as Elisa continued to knit and knit and knit the final shirt, even at the last moments of her life. And then, as the crowd was rushing forward, they said, "Let's take that witchcraft out of her hands and rip it to 1,000 pieces." And just at that moment, the 11 swans alit on the edge of her cart, protecting her, separating her from the crowd. They knew this was a sign of her innocence. They thought it, but not one person dared to say it out loud in her defense. But with the swans there, she took those shirts that she had by her feet, and one by one she threw them over their long swans' necks. They put their wings inside the sleeves, but the last sweater hadn't quite been completed. And when she threw that over her youngest brother's head, he was a human, as all the princes regained their human form. But one arm was still a white feathered wing. And now that her task was done, she could possibly finally speak. And she said, "I am innocent," and fainted in her brother's arms from the exhaustion, the pain, and the fear that she had endured this entire time. The brother explained the curse that they were under. And at that moment, the air was filled with a beautiful fragrance. It was as though strong perfume was surrounding them. And when they looked at the funeral pyre, every twig, every log, every stick had rooted itself in the ground, and tendrils and vines had grown up, making a hedge of 1,000 red roses, perfuming the air.
I like that.
And on top, there was a white flower. And the king picked that white flower and put it on her breast, and she awakened, refreshed and happy and at peace. And now with her own words, she could speak her love of the prince, of the king, who offered her his arm. The church bells started to peal of their own accord. Her handsome princes of brothers followed behind. And never was there a more glorious procession of a king leading his bride, who now they spoke words of love, back to their palace. The wild swans.
That was so good.
Thank
There's
you.
some great lines in there. I'm gonna bring our guests back with us. There's Laura.
That had a personal connection because when I was 9 years old, I was in a summer camp in Connecticut and unknowingly walked through a stand of stinging nettles that were taller than I. And my arms blistered immediately and my hands burned. And so when I found this story, I had a physical and visceral connection. And when she's knitting, those burning sensations and blisters came back into my body as though it were happening right. And that is my connection and memory, why I love this story so much, aside from the beautiful tale.
Yeah, you can tell that you love that story. That was so good. It was a lot of fun. Thank you.
There's a lot of really interesting things written about the wild swans. And of course, this element that you bring in is so beautiful. But it was written when, again, as we said before, when Andersen was young in 1838. And some people read it as a criticism of power in religious systems in that time. And this immense bravery of the girl to rectify and bring harmony and love back into the world. So it's beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. My pleasure. A lot of fun.
Like the Emperor's
Good.
New Clothes is actually, these stories have history. Andersen listened to stories in Odense, Denmark, as a child. And there's some thought that there's a Spanish folktale called The Invisible Cloth that was published in German and in Danish 2 years before he wrote it, that he probably read himself. So you can see, just like The Wild Swans, it's a classic story of young men and sometimes young women being turned into birds. And then this process of how do you bring back the humanity, the
Yeah.
whole humanity, and then having learned to be humble and also to be birds must make them much better human beings. Anyway, thank you, Judith. That's absolutely beautiful. Simon, do we have any comments?
We did have a couple. Anne Meta, she mentioned this message popped up while Julie was telling her story of the Emperor's New Clothes. A classic, it totally is, and I think Julie's telling of it was really, really good. And then, of course, there was Anne Meta again talking about sibling love and care about the brothers coming in and helping the sister. So yeah, we had a couple of comments, and that was pretty much it.
Yeah, and
It's
actually,
a
Regina
beautiful.
Ress, a storyteller, wrote to me during it because she didn't know how to leave a comment of how much she was loving this. So, we want to thank both of you so much. Anna Mette, by the way, Anna Mette Andersen is Danish. She grew up in Denmark. And she wrote and said that, when you grow up in Denmark, you learn all of these stories, you study them, you analyze them when you're in school. And you go on trips to the Andersen Museum, to the Andersen statues, that this is part of people's lives and that you sort of take it for granted. And how much she's enjoying years later, now living in New York as she is, of hearing these stories told again. Because I want to give a special thank you and appreciation. Anna Mehta is the president of the Hans Christian Andersen Storytelling Center. And that is the organization or the umbrella that supports this storytelling for 63 years. And usually, we're in the park, we have the tremendous support of the Parks Department. And so appreciative of them, especially realizing what it must be to not have all these programs in the park and the park itself being so beautiful. I mean, interestingly enough, in this whole sheltering time, the park has completely come to life with animals and fresh air. And also, it's been a resource for so many people who can't leave New York to be out in the countryside. If ever you're lucky to go to Odense, surrounded by absolutely beautiful countryside, and you could visit the little house where Hans Christian Andersen was born, where he lived with his parents, and where he heard these stories. So, anything else you want to say, Simon, about next week?
Yeah, we've got 3 tellers next week. Let me put up the card. We got one more comment from Sophia, who said thank you very much to Julie and Judith for being such engaging storytellers and for sharing such wonderful stories. Thank you, Sophia, for being here. Next week we have, like I said, we have April Armstrong, and we also have Regina Reese, who was Laura just
Yes.
mentioned earlier, and Rachel Harrington, who I have recently become acquainted with through some of the places that we've bumped into. So those are our next week's tellers. Thank you, everyone, so much indeed for being here. Thanks very much indeed to our gang of... What's that doing? That is what I want.
Actually, Simon,
Make one comment.
you could put a banner on because Simon figured out today how we could watch this on YouTube. So maybe you could put it on a banner and run it on the bottom.
Am I?
Yes.
I just wanted to say that there was a new resonant forming of wild swans, which I hadn't thought about had the current conditions not been going on. But when the swans alight on her cart and the whole crowd that was about to rush her realized that she was innocent, not one person spoke up for her. Not one person came forward to help her or protect her or to say they thought. And the wild swan was a sign that she indeed was not a witch and she was innocent. And none of them said anything. And it was the bravery of her brothers and the end of the curse that allowed her to speak in her own defense. So that resonates in the current circumstances even more anew. It's so wonderful to find all these new nuances and meaning, these rich, rich stories.
Yeah. I mean, it makes it worth telling these stories when we're really in such an unusual and unprecedented time. that they give us often deeper insight or voice to what have been 5, 10,000 years of injustices. And these stories are such a beautiful way in which we could live through a kind of healing of these things.
And even when the king comes down and has the nerve to say, "You don't belong in this cave. I'm going to take you with me to my castle," but way to make her. But he does say, and I'm not sure if I said it in this telling, but all he wanted to do was make her happy. And he was, being patriarchal, but he was really not an evil person going to harm her.
Thank you, Julie. How was it? In the mirror of telling the emperor's new clothes right now.
Yeah, right. But it always is. This is my husband's favorite story. And when you say, how can people tell Andersen still today? And this story is the proof of it. I thought these two stories together were such a beautiful combination of stories to put together. Judith, you're telling wonderful. Thank you.
I would agree with that.
Simon, thank you, Judith. Thank you, Julie, and be very excited to tell everybody. Storytelling is word of mouth, and although we have a lot of publicity, it's really all of us speaking, because some people don't know how really wonderful it is to be able to listen to a story. Okay, thank you all. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.